In the next 2 hours, you'll discover Leonardo da Vinci as history has never dared to show him. Not the sanitized genius of textbooks, but a man tormented by forbidden love, haunted by unfinished masterpieces, and desperately seeking the divine through flesh, blood, and impossible dreams of flight. Wait until you hear Leonardo's shocking confession about why he calls himself a tyrant of the mind, rather than a hero. You won't believe his devastating admission about the daughter he abandoned, and the pattern of emotional isolation that shaped his entire life. The moment Leonardo reveals his forbidden love for male companions and his complex attraction to Michelangelo will rewrite everything you thought you knew about the Renaissance master. This is the only interview like this you'll ever hear, Leonardo speaking not as an untouchable artistic legend, but as a lonely, brilliant man who chose knowledge over love and spent a lifetime regretting it. Like this video if you're genuinely enjoying it, and subscribe for more groundbreaking conversations with history's most fascinating figures. Which historical figure would you most want to share tea with? Drop your answer below. I read every comment from fellow history lovers like you, and your suggestions inspire future episodes. Now, let me hand you over to Olivia, who's travelled back in time to Leonardo's final studio in the Château de Clos-Lucé, surrounded by unfinished paintings and notebooks filled with mirror writing, where the greatest mind in history wrestles with mortality and the weight of unfulfilled potential. So dim your lights, get comfortable, and close your eyes. This is Tea with Tyrants and Heroes.
Now, Leonardo, the name of this show is Tea with Tyrants and Heroes, so I have to ask you directly, do you consider yourself a tyrant or a hero? And I want you to really justify your answer. Don't give me the easy response. Tell me why you believe that about yourself.
A tyrant or a hero? What a deliciously impossible question. You force me to examine myself through a lens I've spent decades avoiding, and I find the reflection unsettling. If I am honest, and what purpose would dishonesty serve at this stage of my life? I am neither hero nor tyrant in the traditional sense. I am something far more dangerous. I am a man possessed by an insatiable hunger for understanding, and that hunger has made me selfish in ways I'm only now beginning to comprehend. You see, a tyrant dominates others for power, wealth, territory. A hero sacrifices for others' benefit. But I have sacrificed others for my own intellectual satisfaction. Every patron who commissioned a painting received only half my attention, because the other half was consumed by whatever scientific puzzle had captured my imagination. Every apprentice who sought to learn painting instead found themselves grinding pigments, while I disappeared for weeks to study corpses or design impossible machines. I have been a tyrant to myself, certainly, driving this mind and body past all reasonable limits, sleeping in 4-hour increments, eating whatever was closest to hand while sketching, neglecting basic human needs in service of discovery. But worse, I've been tyrannical in my expectations of others. I've demanded that the world wait for my genius to manifest, that patrons remain patient while I abandoned their commissions mid-brushstroke because I became fascinated by the way light reflected off water. Yet if I consider the hero's path, I've devoted my life to pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Every anatomical study, every engineering design, every artistic technique I've developed adds to humanity's understanding of itself and its world. I've designed machines that could transform agriculture, warfare, transportation, innovations that could alleviate human suffering or advance human capability. In my notebooks lie seeds of progress that may not bloom for centuries, but when they do, they could benefit countless souls. But here's the truth that haunts my sleepless hours. I fear I've been a hero only in my imagination. My flying machines exist only on paper. My anatomical discoveries remain locked in private notebooks. My greatest paintings are unfinished, abandoned when my attention wandered to new obsessions. I've hoarded knowledge like a miser hoards gold, always telling myself I'll share it when it's perfect, when it's complete. So what am I? who had the capacity for heroism but chose the comfortable tyranny of endless preparation over the risk of actual contribution. I am a genius who may die having failed to truly serve the gift he was given. That, perhaps, is the most honest answer I can offer.
That's not what I expected at all. Your self-reflection is profound, and since we're sharing tea together, do you actually like English tea?
English tea? My dear, it's absolutely revolting. Far too weak and far too bitter simultaneously, though I confess I'm fascinated by the engineering of your tea brewing apparatus.
Well, that made me laugh. Now I have to ask what everyone wants to know. Who was the Mona Lisa, and why won't you tell anyone?
Ah, Lisa, you ask about my greatest torment and my most beloved creation in the same breath. The woman you call Mona Lisa, Madonna Lisa Gherardini del Giocondo, was indeed a real person, the wife of a Florentine silk merchant. Francesco del Giocondo commissioned her portrait in 1503, expecting a simple likeness for his family home. What he received instead was something that consumed 15 years of my life and continues to haunt my dreams. But here's what no one understands. Lisa wasn't my subject, she was my teacher. When she first sat for me, I saw in her face something I'd been searching for my entire career. The perfect intersection of geometry and humanity, mathematics and soul. Her features embodied the divine proportions I'd studied in ancient texts, yet her expression held mysteries that no mathematical formula could capture. I kept her portrait not out of attachment to her personally, though she was indeed a remarkable woman, intelligent, well-read, with a laugh that could fill a room and a sadness that she carried like a secret garden. No, I kept the painting because it became my laboratory, my ongoing experiment in the nature of human expression itself. Every few months, I would return to that face, adding another glaze so thin it was barely perceptible, adjusting the corner of her mouth by a hair's breadth, modifying the light in her eyes with techniques I was inventing as I painted. The portrait became a living document of my evolving understanding of light, shadow, human psychology, and the ineffable quality that separates a mere likeness from a window into the soul. You ask why I won't tell anyone the truth about her identity, because the truth is more complex than people want to hear. Yes, she was Lisa Gherardini, but she was also every woman I'd ever studied, every face I'd dissected to understand the mechanics of expression, every dream I'd had about capturing the essence of human emotion in pigment and oil, the smile that everyone obsesses over. It wasn't mysterious to me while I painted it. It was Lisa's natural expression when she was thinking about her children. A gentle, protective love mixed with the melancholy that comes from knowing how fragile happiness truly is. I spent years trying to capture that exact moment of complex emotion, that intersection of joy and sorrow that defines the human experience. But the painting took on a life of its own. Each layer I added seemed to deepen not just the colors, but the personality emerging from the canvas. Sometimes I would enter my studio and feel as though she were watching me, waiting for me to discover what I was truly trying to say through her face. The real secret isn't who she was, it's what she became. She transformed from a commissioned portrait into my life's work, my meditation on the nature of consciousness itself. In trying to capture her essence, I discovered something about the nature of all human essence. She became less a person and more a doorway into understanding how the divine spark manifests in mortal flesh.
The intimacy with which you describe her is remarkable. This brings me to something many people wonder about: your love life, your sexuality. History has debated this for centuries. What's your truth?
Ah, you venture into territory that has caused me more pain than any failed invention or unfinished masterpiece. My truth is that I have loved deeply, passionately, and completely, and that this love has brought me both my greatest joy and my most devastating shame. Yes, I love men. I love their minds, their bodies, their spirits with an intensity that has shaped every aspect of my existence. But in a world where such love is not merely forbidden but punishable by death, this truth has forced me to live as a perpetual exile from my own heart. When I was 24, I was anonymously accused of sodomy with a 17-year-old model named Jacopo Saltarelli. The charges were eventually dropped, likely due to the influence of the Medici family, but that experience branded itself into my soul like a hot iron. I learned that my deepest capacity for love was also my greatest vulnerability, a weapon that could be used to destroy everything I'd worked to build. So I learned to love in shadows, to express my affection through art rather than touch, to channel my passion into creation rather than connection. My beautiful assistants, Gian Giacomo Caprotti, whom I called Salai, my little devil, and Francesco Melzi, my beloved companion of my later years. They were more than students or servants. They were the loves of my life, though I could never speak this truth aloud. Salai came to me when he was 10, a street orphan with the face of an angel and the temperament of a wild cat. He stole from me constantly, lied with breathtaking creativity, and could charm his way out of any consequence. Yet I kept him for 25 years because his laughter was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. When he would pose for my paintings, I would have to stop work periodically because the beauty of his form would overwhelm me with a love so intense it felt like drowning. Francesco arrived later when I was older and perhaps wiser, though no less capable of devastating affection. Where Salai was chaos and passion, Francesco was intellect and gentle devotion. He understood my work, my mind, my need for both solitude and companionship. With him I found the closest thing to domestic happiness I've ever known. Quiet evenings reviewing my notebooks, shared meals where conversation flowed like wine, moments of physical tenderness stolen when the world wasn't watching. But here's the tragedy. I could never fully surrender to love because I could never fully trust it. Every moment of happiness was shadowed by the knowledge that discovery could mean imprisonment, execution, or at minimum, the destruction of my reputation and livelihood. I loved with one foot always poised for flight, one heart always divided between affection and self-preservation. You ask about my truth, and my truth is that love, real, transformative, soul-deep love, requires a vulnerability I could never afford. I gave my beloveds my art, my knowledge, my devotion, but I could never give them my complete trust or open declaration. They lived as my assistants while society remained ignorant of their true place in my heart and my bed. This has left me with a particular understanding of human nature, that we are all, in some way, exiles from our truest selves, all forced to love within constraints that diminish us. My paintings of men possess an intimacy, a tenderness that reveals what I could not speak. My anatomical studies of male forms become love letters written in scientific observation.
Your courage in sharing that moves me deeply. Now, something that's fascinated people for centuries. Why do you write backwards in mirror script? What are you hiding?
Hiding? Everyone assumes I write in mirror script to conceal secrets, to encode mysteries for posterity, to protect dangerous knowledge from prying eyes. The truth is far more mundane and perhaps more revealing than any conspiracy theory could ever be. I write backwards because I am left-handed, and writing from right to left prevents my hand from smudging the ink as I work. It's that simple. But what began as a practical solution to a physical challenge became something much more profound. a way of seeing the world that shaped my entire approach to understanding. You see, when you write in reverse, you must think differently about language, about communication, about the very nature of knowledge itself. Every letter requires conscious intention. You cannot simply let your hand follow familiar patterns. Each stroke must be deliberately planned and executed. This constant awareness, this need to think about thinking, spilled over into every other aspect of my work. Mirror writing taught me to question assumptions, to approach problems from unexpected angles, to consider that the most obvious path might not be the most revealing one. When everyone else studies a bird by watching it fly forward, I study it by imagining how it would look flying backwards. When others examine the human heart by following blood flow in its natural direction, I trace the patterns in reverse to understand the underlying mechanisms. But there's a deeper truth here, one that touches the very core of who I am. Writing backwards means that only I can easily read what I've written. My thoughts, my observations, my most intimate reflections remain accessible primarily to me. In a world where I must constantly guard my words, my actions, my very nature from judgment and persecution, mirror writing became a form of psychological protection. My notebooks are filled with ideas that are centuries ahead of their time. Observations that could be branded as heretical, designs that could revolutionize warfare in ways that might horrify me. By writing in mirror script, I ensure that these ideas remain safely locked away until humanity is ready for them, or until I decide they should never be released at all. There's also something profoundly meditative about the practice. The careful formation of each reversed letter requires a kind of mindfulness that ordinary writing doesn't demand. It slows down my thoughts, forces me to be present with each idea as I commit it to paper, in a mind that typically races from observation to observation, from question to question. Mirror writing creates moments of deliberate pause. I've discovered that when I write backwards, I often understand my own thoughts more clearly. The act of translation from thought to reversed script requires me to examine each idea more carefully, to ensure I truly know what I mean before I attempt to record it. It's as though the mirror writing reflects not just the letters but the thoughts themselves, showing me aspects of my own mind that forward writing might miss. And yes, there is an element of secrecy, though not for the reasons people imagine. I write backwards not to hide dangerous political secrets, but to protect the vulnerability of a mind in constant exploration. My notebooks contain not just scientific observations, but personal confessions, moments of doubt, passionate declarations about beauty, detailed analysis of my own failures and fears. Mirror writing creates a private space where I can be completely honest with myself without fear that casual observers might glimpse thoughts that were never meant for public consumption.
That's such a beautiful explanation. But Leonardo, something that's always puzzled people, why did you leave so many works unfinished? Your greatest paintings, your inventions, your treatises. What stopped you from completing them?
You strike at the heart of my deepest shame and my most fundamental nature. To understand why I abandon works at the moment of near completion, you must understand that for me, the act of discovery is infinitely more intoxicating than the moment of conclusion. When I begin a painting, I am drunk with possibility. Each brushstroke reveals new challenges, new opportunities to push the boundaries of what paint and canvas can achieve. The mixing of pigments becomes an exploration of chemistry and light. The rendering of flesh becomes a study in anatomy, and the soul's reflection in matter. Every element presents a dozen problems to solve, 100 techniques to invent. But as a work nears completion, something terrible happens. The mystery begins to die. The questions that drove me to begin the piece gradually find their answers, and I am left with the prospect of simply finishing. of applying predetermined solutions to solved problems, of becoming a craftsman rather than an explorer. You must understand, I do not paint merely to create beautiful objects. I paint to discover what painting can become, to push the medium beyond its current limitations, to find new ways of capturing truth on a flat surface. Once I understand how to achieve a particular effect, the actual achievement becomes almost tedious. Take the Adoration of the Magi, which I abandoned in 1481. I had solved the complex compositional problems, worked out the perspective, understood how to convey the emotional weight of that cosmic moment. But in solving these challenges, I had also invented new techniques for modeling form with light and shadow, discovered innovative approaches to depicting movement and emotion. These discoveries immediately suggested new possibilities that seemed far more exciting than completing the original work. So I followed the new path, leaving behind a painting that was perhaps 80% complete, but had served its true purpose. It had taught me things I hadn't known before I began it. The finished painting would have been impressive, certainly, but the unfinished painting had already given me everything I truly needed from it. This pattern has shaped my entire life, not just my art. I design flying machines until I understand the principles of flight, then abandon the actual construction because building what I've already figured out feels less compelling than imagining what I haven't yet conceived. I study anatomy until I grasp how muscles and tendons function, then move on to studying water flow or plant growth rather than writing the comprehensive anatomical treatise everyone expects. But here's what torments me in these final years. I've begun to suspect that my inability to finish things isn't just about intellectual curiosity. It's about fear. Fear that the completed work won't match the perfect vision in my mind. Fear that in finishing something I'll expose the limitations of my abilities. Fear that completion requires a kind of finality I'm not prepared to accept. An unfinished painting retains infinite potential. It could still become anything, could still achieve perfection. A finished painting is trapped forever in whatever imperfections I was unable to overcome. In some twisted way, my unfinished works represent my most honest attempts at creating eternal art. Art that exists forever in the realm of possibility rather than being limited by the constraints of reality. Yet, as I near the end of my life, I see how this perfectionism has robbed the world of so much I could have contributed. My flying machines could have been built, tested, refined. My anatomical discoveries could have been shared with physicians who might have saved countless lives. My artistic innovations could have inspired generations of painters to push their own boundaries. Instead, I leave behind notebooks full of fragments, studios full of half-completed masterpieces, and a legacy defined more by what I almost achieved than by what I actually finished.
That's heartbreaking, Leonardo. It makes me wonder about where this perfectionism began. Tell me about your childhood. What was it like being born illegitimate in 15th century Italy?
My childhood. It was a study in contrasts that shaped every aspect of the man I became. Being born illegitimate wasn't just a legal technicality, it was a fundamental condition that coloured every interaction, every opportunity, every moment of self-understanding from my earliest memories. My father, Ser Piero da Vinci, was a successful notary who acknowledged me but could never fully claim me. I lived with my paternal grandfather Antonio and my stepmother Albiera in the village of Vinci until I was 5. Those early years were perhaps the happiest of my life. Albiera loved me as though I were her own, and my grandfather treated me as the inheritor of our family legacy despite my illegitimate status. But when Albiera died and my father remarried, everything changed. I was sent to live with my father and his new wife, Francesca, and suddenly I understood what it meant to be a reminder of someone's past indiscretions. I wasn't unwelcome exactly, but I was complicated. A bright, curious child who asked endless questions but could never inherit the family business, never follow the traditional path from father to son. This illegitimacy became my first teacher in the art of observation and adaptation. I learned to read rooms, to gauge moods, to understand when my presence was welcome and when it was tolerated. I developed an almost supernatural sensitivity to subtle social cues because my security depended on navigating relationships where my status was always uncertain. But perhaps more importantly, I learned that traditional paths weren't available to me, so I would have to create my own. Legitimate sons became notaries, merchants, clerks, following predetermined routes through society. I had no such route, which meant I was free to imagine entirely new ones. My illegitimacy, which could have been a limitation, became a form of liberation. My father, to his credit, recognized my unusual talents early. When I was 13, he took some of my drawings to Andrea del Verrocchio's workshop in Florence. I remember that day with perfect clarity, the smell of tempera and linseed oil, the sound of apprentices grinding pigments, the sight of works in progress that seemed to glow with inner light. Verrocchio looked at my sketches, then looked at me, and I saw in his eyes something I'd never seen in my father's. Recognition not just of talent, but of a kindred spirit. But even in Verrocchio's workshop, my status followed me. I couldn't become a full guild member because of my birth circumstances. I was talented enough to contribute to major commissions, but not legitimate enough to sign them. This taught me that excellence might earn respect, but it couldn't erase the circumstances of one's birth. These early experiences created in me a complex relationship with authority and recognition. On one hand, I learned to be fiercely independent, to value my own judgment above external validation. On the other hand, I developed an insatiable hunger for approval, particularly from father figures who might see in me what my biological father couldn't quite fully embrace. I think my relationship to finishing work stems partially from this childhood experience. Completing something means submitting it for judgment, and I learned early that judgment could be harsh and unpredictable. Better to keep works in progress where they couldn't be definitively rejected, where their potential remained unlimited. My illegitimate birth also gave me a particular empathy for other outsiders, for women in male-dominated fields, for artists struggling for recognition, for anyone whose circumstances placed them outside society's accepted categories. Perhaps this is why I could see the genius in someone like Salai, a street orphan whom others dismissed as worthless. I recognized the spark of intelligence and creativity that society might overlook because it didn't come in the expected package.
Your resilience amazes me. Speaking of complex relationships, what was the truth about your relationship with Michelangelo? The world sees it as rivalry, but what did it feel like from your side?
Michelangelo. There's a name that still quickens my pulse even at this advanced age. To call what existed between us a rivalry is to diminish something far more complex and painful than simple professional competition. What Michelangelo and I shared was something closer to a tragic love affair, two minds so similar in their intensity yet so different in their expression that we could neither ignore each other nor find peace in each other's presence. When I first encountered Michelangelo's work, I experienced something I'd never felt before, the recognition of an equal. Here was another man possessed by the same demons that drove me, the need to capture divine beauty in mortal materials, the compulsion to push every technique beyond its known limitations, the willingness to sacrifice everything human and comfortable in service of something larger than themselves. But where I sought to understand through variety, painting, sculpture, engineering, anatomy, music, Michelangelo achieved depth through focus. He could spend 4 years lying on his back painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling with a dedication that was almost monastic. I envied this singular focus even as I couldn't comprehend how he bore the tedium of repetition. Our famous confrontation in the streets of Florence, when he publicly mocked my failure to complete the bronze horse for the Duke of Milan, cut deeper than any criticism I'd ever received because it came from someone whose opinion actually mattered to me. When lesser minds criticized my work, I could dismiss them as lacking understanding. But Michelangelo understood exactly what I was attempting to achieve, which made his derision devastating. You see, he represented everything I feared I was not: decisive where I was exploratory, focused where I was scattered, prolific where I was perfectionist. When he looked at my unfinished works, he saw evidence of weakness, of a mind too undisciplined to see projects through to completion. When I looked at his finished masterpieces, I saw evidence of a different kind of weakness: the willingness to declare something complete when further exploration might have revealed greater truths. But here's what I've never admitted to anyone. I was also profoundly attracted to him, both intellectually and physically. That man's passion, his complete commitment to his art, his willingness to destroy himself in service of beauty, it was intoxicating. When he worked, he became something beyond human, a force of nature channeling divine creativity through mortal flesh. I would find excuses to visit sites where he was working, telling myself I was studying his techniques when in truth I was studying him. The way he moved around a block of marble like a dancer, seeing the finished sculpture hidden within the stone. The fierce concentration that made him forget to eat, sleep, or acknowledge other human beings. The moments when he would step back from his work with an expression of such pure satisfaction that I envied him more than I envied kings or emperors. Our mutual commission for the Battle of Anghiari and the Battle of Cassina should have been the ultimate test of our respective approaches to art. Instead, it became a public examination of our private demons. I spent months perfecting my cartoon, experimenting with new techniques for depicting movement and emotion in battle scenes. Michelangelo created a composition so dynamically powerful that it redefined what painting could achieve, but neither of us completed our frescoes. I abandoned mine when my experimental techniques failed spectacularly. The paint literally slid off the wall as I worked. He abandoned his when Pope Julius II summoned him to Rome. Perhaps we were both relieved to escape a direct comparison that might have settled questions we weren't ready to have answered. In later years, when we encountered each other at various courts and commissions, we maintained a careful politeness that fooled no one. We were like former lovers forced to interact in public, every gesture fraught with unspoken history, every conversation a careful navigation around topics too dangerous to address directly.
The intensity between you two is palpable. Now I want to ask about something that must have required incredible courage in your time: your anatomical studies. You dissected human corpses when it was forbidden. What drove you to risk everything for that knowledge?
To understand why I risked imprisonment, excommunication, and social ostracism to cut open human bodies, you must understand that I am driven by a hunger that borders on madness, the need to comprehend how the divine spark animates mortal flesh. Every painting I attempted, every sculpture I envisioned, was limited by my ignorance of what lay beneath the skin. When I first held a scalpel over a cadaver, it was an elderly man who had died peacefully in the hospital of Santa Maria Nuova. My hands trembled not from fear of breaking sacred laws, but from anticipation. Here, finally, was the opportunity to answer questions that had tormented me since childhood. How do muscles create movement? What paths do the spirits of life follow through the body? How does the soul manifest in physical form? The first incision changed everything I thought I knew about human existence. Beneath that pale, waxy skin lay a universe of intricate beauty that no classical text had adequately described. The heart wasn't a simple pump as Galen claimed, but a masterpiece of engineering with chambers and valves of impossible elegance. The arrangement of muscles around bones revealed a system of levers and pulleys that made my mechanical designs seem crude by comparison. But it was more than mere scientific curiosity that drove me to spend nights in charnel houses, surrounded by the smell of decay and the weight of mortality. Each dissection was an act of profound intimacy with death itself. To study anatomy properly, you must overcome not just social taboos, but the fundamental human revulsion at confronting our own mortality. I remember my third cadaver, a young woman who had died in childbirth. As I traced the pathways of her reproductive organs, I found myself weeping, not from disgust or sadness, but from overwhelming recognition of the miraculous complexity required to create new life. Every structure I revealed seemed designed with such precision, such elegant economy of function, that I felt I was reading divine scripture written in flesh and blood. Over the years, I dissected more than 30 bodies, men, women, children, the elderly, each presenting new mysteries and revelations. I learned that the classical authorities had based their understanding on animal dissection, never having examined human anatomy directly. Every assumption I had inherited about how bodies function proved incomplete or entirely wrong. The knowledge I gained transformed not just my art, but my entire understanding of existence. When I painted the Last Supper, I could depict each apostle's emotional state through precise anatomical accuracy, the way grief manifests in facial muscles, how shock alters posture, the physical expressions of various forms of spiritual turmoil. My understanding of human movement became so detailed that I could paint figures in positions that previous artists had only imagined, because I knew exactly which muscles and tendons would be engaged in each gesture. But there was a cost to this knowledge that went beyond legal and social risks. To study death so intimately, to spend hours with decomposing flesh, to trace the pathways where life once flowed, it changes you in ways that are difficult to articulate. I developed an almost supernatural awareness of the fragility of life, of how thin the boundary is between animation and stillness. Sometimes, when working on anatomical studies late into the night, I would find myself touching my own pulse, my own breathing, as though to confirm that the life force I was studying in cadavers still animated my own flesh. The knowledge of how easily death could claim any of us, how a small blockage in an artery, a minor infection, a simple fall could end consciousness forever. This awareness shadowed every moment of joy or pleasure I experienced. Yet I regret nothing. The insights I gained from those forbidden dissections inform every line I draw, every form I sculpt, every machine I design. To understand the human body is to understand the template from which all other understanding flows.
Your respect for life is evident even in your study of death. But Leonardo, let's talk about something that captured your imagination like nothing else. Flight. What was it about flying that obsessed you so completely?
Flight. Oh, my dear, you touch upon the greatest obsession of my life, the dream that has consumed more hours of thought and calculation than any other single pursuit. To understand my passion for flight, you must understand that I have spent my entire existence feeling fundamentally earthbound in a mind that was meant to soar. From my earliest memories, I have been tormented by the conviction that human beings were designed incorrectly, that we should have been given wings along with our capacity for reason and imagination. Every time I watch a bird effortlessly navigate 3 dimensions while we humans crawl along the surface of the earth like ants, I feel a profound sense of cosmic injustice. I remember the exact moment this obsession crystallized. I was perhaps 8 years old, lying on my back in a field near Vinci, watching a kestrel hover motionless above me before suddenly diving toward its prey with breathtaking precision. In that instant, I understood that I was witnessing the solution to problems I didn't yet know how to formulate. Problems of balance, control, energy conservation, navigation through space. I began studying birds with the intensity that other men reserve for religious devotion. I would spend entire days observing how a hawk adjusts its wing position to catch thermal currents, how a swallow can change direction instantaneously without losing speed, how birds take off and land with such graceful efficiency. I dissected bird wings to understand the bone structure, the muscle attachments, the way feathers layer to create both lift and control. But mere observation wasn't enough. I needed to understand the mathematical principles underlying flight, the relationships between wing surface area and body weight, the angles required for optimal lift, the mechanisms of propulsion and steering. I covered hundreds of pages with calculations, diagrams, theoretical experiments designed to unlock the secrets of controlled flight. My first flying machine designs were essentially attempts to replicate bird anatomy in human-scale mechanisms. I created elaborate wings with movable feathers powered by human muscle through complex systems of pulleys and levers. But as my understanding deepened, I realized that humans could never generate sufficient power to replicate bird flight directly. We needed fundamentally different approaches. This led me to envision machines that worked with human limitations rather than against them. Gliders that could catch air currents, helicopter-like devices that could achieve lift through rotational motion, parachutes that could allow controlled descent. Each design represented a different strategy for overcoming the tyranny of gravity that keeps human consciousness trapped at ground level. But my obsession with flight goes deeper than mechanical engineering. Flight represents the ultimate expression of human potential, the ability to transcend physical limitations through applied intelligence. When I imagine myself soaring above the landscape, seeing the world from perspectives no human has ever experienced, I feel as though I'm glimpsing what humanity could become if we fully embraced our capacity for innovation and discovery. There's also something deeply spiritual about flight that I struggle to articulate. Birds exist in a three-dimensional world that includes both earth and heaven. They can touch the ground to feed and rest, then ascend to heights where they commune with clouds and sky. Flight would give humans access to this middle realm between terrestrial and celestial existence. We could remain grounded in practical reality while also experiencing the freedom of pure movement through space. Yet for all my calculations and designs, I have never actually achieved powered flight. My machines remain theoretical, existing only on paper and in my imagination. This failure haunts me more than any unfinished painting or abandoned sculpture, because flight represents the one discovery that could truly transform human existence rather than merely enhancing it. In my darkest moments, I wonder if my obsession with flight is really about escaping the limitations of my own mortality, the constraints of my historical moment, the weight of unfulfilled potential that grows heavier with each passing year.
Your yearning for flight is so moving. Speaking of your connection to living creatures, you're known to be vegetarian in an age when that was almost unheard of. What drives your compassion for animals?
My relationship with animals. This touches upon something fundamental about how I perceive life itself. You see, most people of my era, and I suspect your era as well, operate under the comfortable assumption that humans exist in a separate category from other living creatures, that we possess souls while animals are merely sophisticated automatons designed for our use and consumption. But my anatomical studies shattered this illusion completely. When I dissected a human heart and then a pig's heart, I found them nearly identical in structure and function. When I studied the nervous systems of various creatures, I discovered that the pathways for sensation and movement follow remarkably similar patterns across species. The more I learned about the mechanics of life, the more I understood that the differences between humans and animals are matters of degree, not fundamental category. This recognition created what I can only describe as a moral crisis that has shaped every aspect of how I live. If a cow experiences pain through the same neurological mechanisms that allow me to feel pain, how can I justify causing that suffering for my dinner? If a horse demonstrates problem-solving intelligence, memory, and emotional attachment to companions, what right do I have to treat it as mere property? I remember the moment this understanding crystallized into action. I was perhaps 25, walking through the Florence market when I came upon a vendor selling caged birds. The birds were cramped, distressed, crying out in obvious anguish. Without thinking, I purchased the entire flock and immediately opened their cages, watching as they flew away to freedom. The joy I felt in that moment, seeing creatures return to their natural state, was more intense than any pleasure I'd ever derived from eating meat. From that day forward, I could not bring myself to consume the flesh of creatures whose suffering I understood so intimately. People think this makes me weak or overly sentimental, but I've found quite the opposite. My diet of fruits, vegetables, grains, and dairy products provides excellent nourishment and leaves me feeling lighter, more energetic, more mentally clear than when I consumed heavy meals of meat. But my compassion for animals extends far beyond dietary choices. I design my mechanical devices specifically to reduce reliance on animal labor. My self-propelled carts, water-powered mills, and various automated mechanisms are all attempts to create alternatives to forcing horses, oxen, and donkeys into servitude. Every machine I invent that can replace animal labor is a small victory for reducing suffering in the world. I'm also fascinated by animal intelligence and behavior in ways that others find peculiar. I spend hours observing how cats solve problems, how dogs navigate social hierarchies, how birds communicate complex information to their flocks. These creatures possess forms of knowledge that we dismiss because we cannot directly access their experience, but I suspect they understand aspects of existence that human consciousness cannot perceive. My love for animals has also influenced my art in profound ways. When I paint animals, I strive to capture not just their physical forms, but their essential natures, the alertness of a cat, the loyal devotion of a dog, the wild freedom of a horse. I want viewers to see these creatures as individuals with their own inner lives, rather than as mere symbols or decorative elements. This compassion has sometimes put me at odds with patrons and colleagues who expect me to design weapons or war machines that would cause mass death and suffering. While I have created such designs out of financial necessity, I do so with deep reluctance and often introduce subtle flaws that would prevent them from being effectively implemented. I cannot reconcile my understanding of life's preciousness with the creation of more efficient methods for destroying it.
Your compassion is extraordinary. But Leonardo, let's address something many people struggle to understand: your work habits. You're known for procrastination, for starting multiple projects simultaneously. How does your creative mind actually work?
Procrastination. What a harsh word for what I prefer to think of as creative incubation. You see, most people misunderstand the nature of innovation completely. They imagine that creative work should follow the same linear progression as, say, building a wall. You lay one stone, then the next, until the structure is complete. But genuine discovery doesn't work that way at all. Breakthrough insights require a kind of mental composting process where ideas must ferment, combine, and transform in ways that conscious effort cannot force or accelerate. What looks like procrastination to external observers is actually the most productive phase of my creative process. Let me explain how my mind actually functions. When I begin a new project, Whether it's a painting, an engineering design, or an anatomical study, I don't start by trying to solve it directly. Instead, I immerse myself in gathering every possible piece of related information. I observe, I sketch, I read, I experiment with materials and techniques. This phase might last weeks or months, and to outside observers it appears as though I'm accomplishing nothing concrete. But during this apparent dormancy, something extraordinary is happening beneath the surface of consciousness. My mind is making connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena, finding patterns that link artistic problems to engineering challenges, discovering how anatomical structures might inspire architectural innovations. These cross-pollinations between different fields of knowledge are where my most significant breakthroughs emerge. For example, my work on human anatomy informed my understanding of hydraulic systems, which influenced my designs for canal locks, which led to insights about paint flow that revolutionized my painting techniques. These connections only become apparent when I allow my mind to wander freely between projects rather than forcing it to focus narrowly on one specific challenge. This is why I maintain multiple projects simultaneously. While my conscious mind works on painting the Mona Lisa, my subconscious continues processing problems related to flying machine design. When I become stuck on one challenge, I can shift to another, allowing the original problem to continue developing in the background. Often, solutions to painting problems emerge while I'm designing machinery, and mechanical insights arise while I'm studying human proportions. But I'll admit there's more to my procrastination than just creative process. There's also fear, specifically the fear of finality. As long as a work remains in progress, it retains unlimited potential. Every brushstroke could still be refined. Every mechanical component could still be improved. Every theory could still be expanded. The moment I declare something finished, I'm also declaring that this represents the absolute best I could achieve, and what if that's not good enough? I've also discovered that my most innovative ideas often come not during focused work sessions, but during periods of apparent idleness. While taking long walks, soaking in warm baths, or simply lying in bed before sleep, my mind makes connections that intense concentration seems to inhibit. What others perceive as laziness or avoidance, I've learned to recognize as essential creative time. My work habits also reflect the reality that I'm fundamentally more interested in understanding than in producing. Give me a commission to paint a portrait, and I'll become fascinated by the optical properties of different pigments, the mathematical principles underlying perspective, the anatomical accuracy required for convincing expressions. The finished portrait becomes almost secondary to the knowledge I gain in creating it. This approach has obviously created practical problems throughout my career. Patrons want deliverable results, not endless exploration. But I've found that the depth of understanding I gain through this intensive process ultimately produces work that transcends anything I could create through more conventional methods.
Your creative process is fascinating. But Leonardo, you've lived with death intimately through your anatomical work. How has that shaped your view of mortality and your own eventual death?
Death. It has been my most intimate teacher and my most persistent companion throughout this long life. Through my anatomical studies, I have witnessed death in all its forms, sudden and gradual, peaceful and violent, expected and shocking. I have held human hearts that ceased beating hours before, traced the pathways where consciousness once flowed, examined the physical mechanics of life's departure from flesh. This intimate familiarity with mortality has given me a perspective that I suspect few humans share. I do not fear death in the conventional sense because I understand it too thoroughly to mythologize it. Death is not a mysterious force or divine punishment. It is simply the point at which the intricate machinery of life can no longer sustain itself. Like a clock, whose springs have unwound, or a candle that has consumed its final bit of wax. But this clinical understanding coexists with a profound sadness about what death represents, the ultimate waste of accumulated knowledge and experience. Every time I dissected a cadaver, I was examining not just physical structures, but the remains of someone who had spent decades learning, loving, creating, dreaming. All of that consciousness, all of those memories and insights simply extinguished. This awareness has created in me a frantic urgency about knowledge preservation. I fill notebook after notebook with observations, not because I expect to live long enough to develop all these ideas fully, but because I hope some future mind might build upon foundations I've laid. My anatomical drawings, my mechanical designs, my artistic techniques, these represent my attempts to cheat death by leaving pieces of my understanding embedded in the world. Yet I am also haunted by the recognition that much of what I've learned will die with me. The subtle intuitions about how light behaves, the hard-won understanding of human emotional expression, the countless small discoveries that exist only in my memory. These cannot be adequately recorded in any notebook or drawing. Every human death represents an irreplaceable loss of understanding that took decades to accumulate. As I've aged, I've become increasingly aware of my own mortality approaching. My hands, which once moved with perfect precision across canvas or parchment, now tremble slightly. My eyes, which could once discern the finest details of anatomical structures, require more light and strain with prolonged use. My memory, while still sharp, occasionally fails to retrieve information that once came effortlessly to mind. But perhaps strangest of all, I find myself experiencing a kind of relief alongside the sadness. For 70 years, I have carried an overwhelming sense of responsibility for the gifts I was given, the pressure to justify this extraordinary mind, to push every boundary, to solve every mystery that presented itself. The approach of death offers a peculiar form of freedom, permission to finally rest, to stop striving, to accept that some questions will remain unanswered. I've been thinking lately about what legacy I want to leave, and I've realized that my unfinished works might be more honest than completed ones. They represent the true nature of knowledge, always provisional, always incomplete, always pointing toward further mysteries that lie beyond current understanding. Perhaps my greatest gift to posterity is not solutions, but better questions. There's also something I've never admitted to anyone. In my most private moments, I sometimes hope that death might reveal answers to questions that life has kept hidden. What is the nature of consciousness itself? How does the immaterial soul interact with physical matter? What lies beyond the boundaries of mortal perception? My scientific mind tells me that death is simply cessation, but my deeper intuition suspects there might be discoveries waiting that no anatomical dissection could ever reveal.
Your wisdom about death is profound. Leonardo, as someone who has achieved so much yet speaks of unfinished business, what would you say is your greatest regret?
My greatest regret? You ask me to choose among a lifetime of sorrows, to select the single decision or indecision that causes me the most anguish as I face my final years. This is perhaps the most difficult question you could pose, because it forces me to confront the gap between who I could have been and who I actually became. My greatest regret is not any specific work I failed to complete, not any particular opportunity I missed, but something far more fundamental. I regret that I allowed my hunger for understanding to overshadow my capacity for human connection. I regret that I chose the solitary pursuit of knowledge over the shared experience of community, love, and simple human warmth. You see, I have spent my entire life as an observer rather than a participant. I study human emotion but rarely allow myself to feel it fully. I understand the mechanics of laughter, but seldom permit myself the vulnerability of genuine joy. I can paint love with extraordinary accuracy, but I have never surrendered completely to being loved or to loving without reservation. Even with Salai and Francesco, the two people who came closest to my heart, I maintained a careful distance. I gave them my affection, my protection, my knowledge, but I held back the deepest parts of myself. I loved them as a scholar loves his subject matter, intensely but analytically, passionately but with the safety of intellectual detachment. This pattern has defined every relationship in my life. With patrons, I remained the brilliant artist they commissioned rather than a friend they truly knew. With fellow artists, I maintained competitive distance rather than seeking genuine collaboration or mentorship. With students, I shared techniques but rarely shared the fears, doubts, and vulnerabilities that might have made me truly human to them. I convinced myself that this emotional distance was necessary for my work, that deep personal attachments would dilute my focus or compromise my objectivity. But now, in these final years, I understand that the opposite was true. My isolation has impoverished my understanding of the very human nature I've spent decades trying to capture in art and science. The most profound insights about existence come not from solitary observation but from genuine intimacy, from allowing yourself to be known completely by another consciousness, from experiencing the world through eyes other than your own. I have missed this entirely, and my work has suffered for it. When I paint expressions of grief, I draw from anatomical knowledge rather than from personal experience of loss. When I design machines to serve human needs, I imagine those needs intellectually rather than understanding them through shared experience. My art, for all its technical mastery, lacks the emotional authenticity that comes only from a life fully lived in connection with others. But perhaps even more painfully, I regret the impact my isolation has had on those who tried to love me. Salai spent 25 years seeking a father figure who could never quite commit to that role. Francesco devoted his youth to a mentor who gave generously of everything except his heart. My assistants, my patrons, even casual acquaintances, all encountered a version of myself that was carefully curated, intellectually generous, but emotionally withholding. I tell myself that this was necessary protection, that someone of my inclinations in this particular historical moment could not afford the vulnerability that genuine intimacy requires. But I suspect that's partly self-justification. I think I was simply afraid that if people saw past the persona of the great Leonardo da Vinci to the uncertain, needy, desperately lonely man beneath, they would find him insufficient. So I built walls of brilliance, used my gifts as both sword and shield, crafted a public identity so compelling that it obscured the private reality of isolation and longing. And now, as death approaches, I realize that I have spent 70 years being admired, but not truly known, respected, but not genuinely loved.
That's incredibly moving, Leonardo. Your honesty about loneliness touches something deep. Tell me about your dreams, both the ones that visit you at night and the ones that sustained you through life.
Dreams. Both sleeping and waking, they have been the landscape where my truest self has lived. You ask about both, and I find they are more intertwined than most people realize. My sleeping dreams often contain solutions to problems my waking mind cannot solve, while my waking dreams provide the vision that makes daily existence bearable. My sleeping dreams are extraordinary, vivid beyond what I believe most people experience. I dream in perfect detail, not just visual images, but complete sensory experiences with sounds, textures, even smells that seem more real than reality itself. Often I dream of flying, not in my mechanical devices, but with wings that have somehow grown from my own shoulders. In these dreams, I soar above landscapes that combine the familiar geography of Italy with impossible architectures that follow dream logic rather than physical laws. These flying dreams provide a form of freedom I've never experienced in waking life. I move through space with perfect control, seeing the world from perspectives that no earthbound human has ever enjoyed. Sometimes I dream of floating among clouds, studying their formations and weather patterns from within. Other times I dream of diving like a bird of prey, experiencing the rush of controlled descent that my waking experiments with parachutes have only approximated. But my most profound dreams involve encounters with knowledge itself, personified as various figures who reveal secrets about the nature of reality. I dream of conversations with ancient philosophers, with future inventors, with mysterious teachers who show me mathematical principles that unlock new understanding about light, motion, anatomy, art. When I wake from these dreams, I often rush to my notebooks to record insights that came from these imaginary dialogues. My nightmares, however, are equally vivid and far more troubling. I frequently dream of my anatomical subjects coming back to life while I'm dissecting them, awakening to accuse me of violating their eternal rest. These dreams are so realistic that I can feel their cold flesh warming under my hands, hear their voices asking why I couldn't let them rest in peace. I wake from these nightmares with a profound sense of guilt that follows me for days. I also have recurring nightmares about my unfinished works coming to life to reproach me. Incomplete paintings step down from their easels to ask why I abandoned them. Mechanical designs animate themselves to demonstrate their potential while lamenting their unrealized existence. These dreams force me to confront the weight of unfulfilled potential that haunts my waking hours. But perhaps my most disturbing nightmares involve scenarios where my knowledge dies with me, where I'm lying on my deathbed desperately trying to share crucial discoveries with people who cannot understand or preserve them. I dream of watching decades of accumulated wisdom evaporate like morning mist, leaving no trace in the world. These dreams wake me with a panic that drives me to fill more pages, sketch more diagrams, record more observations. My waking dreams, however, sustain me through even the darkest periods of doubt and isolation. I envision a future where human beings have overcome the limitations that currently constrain us, where we fly through the skies in sophisticated machines, where disease has been conquered through anatomical understanding, where art has evolved to capture truths about existence that current techniques cannot express. I dream of cities designed according to principles of optimal human flourishing, with efficient transportation, clean water systems, and architectural harmony that elevates the spirit. I dream of educational institutions where knowledge is shared freely rather than hoarded by elites. I dream of a world where human creativity is valued above human destruction. Most persistently, I dream of completing a single work that fully expresses everything I understand about beauty, truth, and the nature of existence. A masterpiece that synthesizes all my various discoveries into one perfect expression of human potential. This dream has driven me for decades, though I suspect it represents an impossible ideal rather than an achievable goal.
Your dreams reveal such depth of vision. Leonardo, in an age of intense religious faith, how do you reconcile your scientific discoveries with spiritual beliefs? What is your relationship with God?
God, religion, spirituality, these are waters I have navigated carefully my entire life, for they represent perhaps the most dangerous intersection between my private understanding and public expectation. To speak honestly about my relationship with the divine is to risk accusations of heresy, yet to remain silent would be to deny the most profound aspect of my existence. I do believe in God, but not the God that most of my contemporaries worship. Through my anatomical studies, my observations of nature, my investigations into the mathematical principles underlying reality, I have encountered evidence of an intelligence so vast, so elegant, so incomprehensibly sophisticated that it demands recognition as divine. But this God bears little resemblance to the anthropomorphic deity of popular Christianity. The God I have discovered through scientific investigation is not a bearded patriarch dispensing rewards and punishments, but rather the fundamental creative principle that establishes the laws governing existence itself. When I study the perfect spiral of a nautilus shell and find it follows the same mathematical ratios that govern the proportions of the human body, I am witnessing divine signature. When I observe how blood flows through the heart according to hydraulic principles that also govern river systems, I am reading divine text written in the language of physics. This understanding has created significant tension with institutional religion, which demands faith where I require evidence, which insists on mystery where I seek understanding. The Church teaches that human knowledge has limits that must not be crossed, that certain truths are reserved for divine revelation alone. But I cannot accept artificial boundaries on human inquiry when every investigation reveals new layers of divine creativity waiting to be discovered. My anatomical dissections have been particularly challenging to reconcile with Orthodox doctrine. The Church teaches that the human body is sacred, created in God's image, and should not be violated even after death. Yet my studies have revealed the body to be the most extraordinary manifestation of divine engineering imaginable. Surely understanding this magnificent creation is itself a form of worship. I have found God more present in the dissection room than in most cathedrals. When I trace the pathways of human nervous systems, when I study the biomechanics of joint movement, when I examine the optical structures that enable vision, I am conducting a form of prayer that brings me closer to divine understanding than any ritual or ceremony. But this scientific spirituality has also revealed disturbing truths about human nature that challenge comfortable religious assumptions. Through my studies of anatomy and behavior, I have learned that humans are not fundamentally different from other animals. We possess the same basic drives, the same neurological structures, the same mortality. This suggests that our supposed special status in creation may be more self-flattering mythology than divine truth. I've also struggled with the problem of suffering. If God is both omnipotent and benevolent, why does creation include so much pain, disease, and early death? My anatomical studies have shown me countless bodies ravaged by illness, deformity, violence. I've seen how easily the magnificent machinery of life can be disrupted by injury or disease. Either God is not all-powerful, or divine benevolence operates according to principles beyond human comprehension. Yet despite these theological difficulties, I find my sense of the sacred growing stronger with age, not weaker. Every scientific discovery deepens my awe at the complexity and beauty of existence. The more I understand about natural laws, the more miraculous existence itself appears. That anything exists at all, that consciousness can emerge from matter, that beauty and truth and love are possible in a universe governed by mathematical principles. These facts seem to require explanation beyond pure materialism. I suspect that what we call God is not separate from creation, but rather the creative principle working through natural laws. Divine will expresses itself through physics, chemistry, biology, not in violation of these principles, but as their ultimate source and purpose.
Your spiritual perspective is profound, but Leonardo, even someone with your confidence and genius must have fears. What frightens you most deeply?
Fear. Yes, I am no stranger to fear. though it may surprise people to learn that my deepest terrors have little to do with external threats and everything to do with the nature of my own mind. My greatest fear is not death, not poverty, not social disgrace, but rather the prospect of losing control over my own consciousness, of becoming trapped within a mind that no longer serves me reliably. You see, my intelligence has been both my greatest gift and my heaviest burden. Everything I am, everything I've accomplished, everything that makes my existence meaningful depends entirely on the continued function of this intricate organ inside my skull. But I have seen through my anatomical studies how easily brain function can be disrupted by injury, disease, or simply the natural deterioration of age. I live in constant awareness that a single blow to the head, a small blockage in the wrong blood vessel, or the gradual accumulation of age-related damage could transform me from Leonardo da Vinci into a drooling invalid who cannot recognize his own name. This possibility terrifies me far more than any physical pain or social humiliation ever could. Already I notice small changes that fill me with dread. Sometimes I reach for a word that has always come easily, only to find my mind grasping at emptiness. Occasionally I walk into my studio and momentarily forget why I came there. My hand, which once moved with perfect precision, now trembles when I attempt detailed work. These could be normal signs of aging, but they could also be harbingers of mental decline. I am equally terrified by the prospect of my mind remaining sharp while my body fails around it. To be trapped within a paralyzed or pain-racked form while retaining full awareness of my limitations would be a special kind of hell. I've seen elderly men whose brilliant minds remain imprisoned in bodies that can no longer execute their intentions, and I cannot imagine a more cruel fate. But perhaps my deepest fear is more philosophical than physical. I am terrified that everything I believe about the nature of knowledge, creativity, and human potential might be fundamentally wrong. What if consciousness itself is merely an illusion created by complex brain chemistry? What if free will is a comforting fiction and all my supposed insights are just the inevitable result of predetermined neural patterns? Through my scientific investigations, I've learned that human beings are far more similar to other animals than we like to admit. We're driven by the same basic biological imperatives, subject to the same physical laws, mortal in exactly the same ways. This understanding has gradually eroded my confidence in human specialness. What if our capacity for art, science, and philosophy is just a more complex version of what allows birds to build nests or bees to create hives? I'm also deeply afraid of time itself. Not just my own mortality, but the relentless passage of time that makes all human achievement temporary. Every building will eventually crumble, every painting will fade, every discovery will be superseded by better understanding. The Renaissance masters whose work I admired in my youth are already being forgotten as new styles emerge. What makes me think my contributions will prove any more enduring? Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night gripped by existential terror at the sheer improbability of consciousness. That matter can organize itself into patterns that experience beauty, create art, seek truth. This seems so unlikely, so fragile, so easily lost. I lie in the darkness overwhelmed by the cosmic loneliness of being a brief spark of awareness in an infinite universe that seems largely indifferent to our existence. Yet perhaps my most shameful fear is that I am not nearly as exceptional as I've allowed myself to believe. What if future generations will see my work as primitive, my insights as obvious, my supposed genius as merely the product of living at a time when knowledge was still rudimentary? What if I'm remembered not as a visionary, but as a curiosity, a footnote in the real story of human progress?
Your fears reveal such deep humanity. Leonardo, I want to ask about your relationships with women. In a time when women had limited opportunities, how did you see and interact with the women in your life?
My relationship with women, this is perhaps one of the most complex and contradictory aspects of my character. I exist in a world that systematically undervalues female intelligence and creativity, yet some of my most profound insights about human nature have come from my interactions with remarkable women who were forced to hide their brilliance behind socially acceptable facades. Women have fascinated me as subjects of study, their anatomy, their psychology, their social positioning, but I must confess that I have often kept them at a distance that was both protective and limiting. My inclinations toward men meant that I never pursued romantic relationships with women, which paradoxically allowed me to see them more clearly than many of my contemporaries who viewed women primarily through the lens of sexual desire or possession. But this distance came with its own blindness. I studied women as I studied everything else, with intense curiosity but from a position of analytical detachment that sometimes failed to recognize their full humanity. I painted their faces with extraordinary care while remaining largely ignorant of their inner lives, their dreams, their frustrated ambitions. Take Lisa Gherardini, my beloved subject. During our sessions, I discovered that she possessed an intellect that rivaled many of the scholars I knew. Yet she was forced to channel this brilliance into managing a household and raising children. She spoke multiple languages, understood mathematics, had read extensively in philosophy and literature. But none of this could be publicly acknowledged or developed because of her gender. Through her, I began to understand that the world was wasting half its intellectual potential by denying women access to education, artistic training, and professional opportunities. How many potential Leonardos had been born female and therefore never allowed to develop their gifts? How many discoveries remained unmade because brilliant minds were trapped in social roles that offered no outlet for their capabilities? I've encountered women throughout my career who disguised their knowledge to avoid social censure. Female patrons who commissioned works while pretending to defer to male advisors. Women in court who offered artistic suggestions while allowing men to take credit. Mothers who secretly taught their daughters skills that were officially forbidden to them. Perhaps most remarkably, I've worked with several women who served as unofficial assistants or advisors while maintaining the public fiction that they were merely domestic servants or companions. These women helped mix pigments, suggested compositional improvements, even contributed ideas for mechanical designs, but their contributions could never be acknowledged because doing so would have compromised both their reputations and mine. My anatomical studies have also given me unique insights into female physiology that have increased my respect for women's physical capabilities. Through dissecting female cadavers, I learned about the remarkable adaptations that allow women to create and birth new life, the complexity of reproductive anatomy, the hormonal systems that regulate fertility, the physical demands of pregnancy and childbirth. These discoveries revealed forms of strength and resilience that male-dominated society consistently undervalues. Yet I'm ashamed to admit that I've also participated in systems that limit women's opportunities. I've accepted commissions for paintings that celebrate male achievement while relegating women to decorative or symbolic roles. I've designed buildings and machines that assume male users and male needs. I've written treatises using language that excludes feminine perspectives and experiences. There's also a personal confession I must make. My emotional distance from women partly stems from fear of the power they might have over me if I allowed myself to be vulnerable to them. I've seen how love, even platonic love, can transform rational men into creatures driven by emotion rather than logic. My commitment to knowledge and discovery required maintaining intellectual control that intimate relationships with women might have threatened. But perhaps most sadly, I've realized that my isolation from deep female friendship has impoverished my understanding of human nature itself. Women often perceive emotional and social subtleties that escape male attention. They understand forms of communication, cooperation, and nurturing that could have enhanced both my art and my scientific work if I had been wise enough to seek their guidance more actively.
Your respect for women's hidden talents is clear. Let's talk about your artistic innovations, the techniques that revolutionized painting. What are you most proud of discovering?
My artistic techniques. Here we venture into territory where pride and frustration exist in constant tension. I am proud of what I've discovered, yet tormented by how much more I believe could be achieved if I had unlimited time and resources. My most significant innovation, the one that has influenced every painting I've created since I first understood it, is what I call sfumato, though the technique itself resists precise verbal description. Sfumato is the art of rendering without harsh outlines, of suggesting form through subtle gradations of light and shadow rather than defining it through linear boundaries. This discovery emerged from my anatomical studies, where I observed that living flesh doesn't possess the sharp edges that traditional painting techniques attempted to recreate. Human skin transitions gradually from light to shadow with countless intermediate tones that create the illusion of three-dimensional form. To capture this reality, I developed methods of applying paint in layers so thin they're nearly transparent, building up form through accumulated translucency rather than opaque color application. The technical challenges this approach presents are extraordinary. Each layer must dry completely before the next application, which means that a single passage of flesh tones might require weeks to complete. The pigments must be ground to perfect consistency, mixed with oils in precise ratios, applied with brush strokes so subtle they're individually invisible. One impatient moment, one slightly thick application can ruin weeks of patient work, but the results justify this meticulous process. When successfully executed, sfumato creates forms that seem to breathe, that appear to exist in real space rather than on a flat surface. The technique allows me to suggest rather than state, to invite viewers to complete the forms with their own perception, rather than forcing specific interpretations upon them. My second major innovation involves the mathematical principles underlying perspective, particularly what I call aerial perspective. The recognition that atmosphere itself affects how we perceive distant objects. Through careful observation, I discovered that air gradually obscures distant forms, reduces color saturation, and softens edges in predictable ways that can be systematically reproduced in paint. This understanding revolutionized how I approach landscape painting. Instead of treating background elements as simple decorative additions, I now render them according to optical laws that create convincing illusions of vast space. The mountains in my paintings recede not just through linear perspective, but through atmospheric effects that make viewers feel they could walk into the painted space. Perhaps my most technically ambitious innovation involves the study of light itself, not just how it illuminates objects, but how it behaves as it travels through space, reflects off various surfaces, and interacts with human vision. I've spent countless hours observing how sunlight changes throughout the day, how candlelight creates different emotional atmospheres, how reflected light from water or polished metal can dramatically alter the appearance of nearby objects. This optical research has led me to develop painting techniques that capture not just the appearance of things, but the quality of light in which they exist. When I paint a portrait, I'm not just rendering a face, I'm recreating the specific lighting conditions that reveal that face most meaningfully. This requires understanding how different pigments interact with various types of illumination, how to mix colors that will appear natural under multiple viewing conditions. but my greatest innovation may be the integration of all these technical discoveries with psychological insight. Traditional portraiture focuses on physical likeness, creating images that resemble their subjects superficially. My approach attempts to capture the inner essence of my subjects, the psychological states that define their true character. This requires extraordinary sensitivity to subtle details of expression, posture, gesture, the angle of an eyebrow, the tension around the mouth, the position of hands. These elements must be orchestrated to reveal personality rather than just appearance. It's portraiture as character analysis, painting as psychological investigation. The challenge is that these innovations require absolute technical mastery, combined with profound human understanding. Every brushstroke must serve both optical accuracy and emotional truth simultaneously.
Your technical mastery is astounding, but beyond art, your engineering designs were centuries ahead of their time. Which of your inventions do you believe could most transform human society?
My inventions. This question strikes at the heart of my greatest ambition and my most devastating failure. I have conceived machines that could revolutionize every aspect of human existence: transportation, warfare, manufacturing, communication, yet virtually none have moved beyond the theoretical stage during my lifetime. This gap between vision and implementation haunts me more than any unfinished painting ever could. Of all my mechanical designs, I believe my self-propelled vehicles hold the greatest potential for transforming daily life. I have envisioned carts powered by spring mechanisms that could transport people and goods without relying on animal labor. These machines could multiply human productivity while reducing the suffering we inflict on horses, oxen, and other creatures forced into servitude. But the broader implications extend far beyond mere convenience. Self-propelled transportation could enable trade networks of unprecedented scope, allowing ideas, innovations, and cultural exchange to flow between distant regions with remarkable speed. Isolated communities could connect with centers of learning. Knowledge could spread across continents within months rather than years or decades. I've also designed manufacturing machines that could revolutionize textile production, metalworking, and countless other industries. My automated looms could produce cloth with consistency and speed impossible through hand weaving. My designs for precision gears and mechanical advantage systems could enable construction projects of unprecedented scale and accuracy. Yet perhaps my most transformative invention involves water management systems. I have conceived networks of canals, locks, and pumping mechanisms that could turn marshlands into productive farmland, bring fresh water to arid regions, and control flooding that devastates communities. These hydraulic systems could literally reshape geography to serve human needs while working with natural forces rather than against them. The military applications of my engineering knowledge trouble me deeply, yet I cannot deny their potential significance. My designs for fortifications could make cities virtually impregnable to conventional siege warfare. My artillery pieces could revolutionize battlefield tactics. My reconnaissance devices could provide commanders with intelligence capabilities that could prevent unnecessary casualties through superior information. But it's my flying machines that represent the most profound potential for human transformation. If my designs could be successfully implemented, they would fundamentally alter our relationship to geography itself. Mountains, rivers, and oceans would become suggestions rather than barriers. Communication across vast distances could occur within days. Exploration and mapping could advance at extraordinary pace. More philosophically, practical flight would transform human consciousness by giving us direct access to perspectives previously available only to imagination. to see the earth from above, to understand geography as a coherent whole rather than a collection of local regions, to experience the freedom of three-dimensional movement. These experiences would inevitably change how we think about territory, boundaries, and our place in the natural world. Yet here's what torments me. I understand why my inventions haven't been implemented during my lifetime, and the reasons reveal fundamental limitations about the relationship between innovation and society. Many of my designs require manufacturing precision that current techniques cannot achieve. Others depend on materials that don't yet exist or are prohibitively expensive. Some require infrastructure investments that no single patron could afford. But the deeper problem is that truly revolutionary innovations often threaten existing power structures. Self-propelled vehicles would devastate industries built around animal breeding and training. Automated manufacturing would eliminate countless traditional jobs. Military innovations could make existing armies and fortifications obsolete. Those who profit from current systems have strong incentives to prevent changes that would diminish their advantages. I've also learned that society needs time to prepare for major technological shifts. Introducing revolutionary machines too quickly could cause social chaos, economic disruption, or unintended consequences that might be worse than the problems the innovations were meant to solve. Perhaps my greatest contribution isn't any specific invention, but rather the methodology of innovation itself, the systematic application of scientific observation to practical problem solving.
Your systematic approach to innovation is remarkable. Given your vast self-taught knowledge, what are your thoughts on education? How should human beings learn and grow intellectually?
Education. Here we touch upon one of my deepest convictions and greatest frustrations with the world as it currently exists. The educational systems of my time are fundamentally broken, designed to produce obedient clerks and unquestioning believers rather than innovative thinkers and creative problem solvers. Traditional education treats knowledge as a fixed collection of facts to be memorized, rather than as a dynamic process of discovery and understanding. Students are forced to accept ancient authorities without question, to repeat received wisdom rather than investigate phenomena directly. This approach produces scholars who can quote Aristotle extensively but cannot observe a falling object and deduce the principles governing its motion. The greatest tragedy is that human beings are born with extraordinary capacity for learning, yet most educational institutions systematically destroy this natural curiosity. Children ask brilliant questions about everything they encounter. Why do birds fly? How do plants grow? What makes colors change? But instead of nurturing this investigative spirit, we teach them to stop questioning and start accepting. My own education was unconventional, and I now believe this limitation was actually my greatest advantage. Because I couldn't read Latin fluently, I was forced to learn directly from observation rather than relying on classical texts. Because I lacked formal training in mathematics, I developed my own approaches to calculation and geometric reasoning. Because I had no academic credentials, I had to prove my understanding through practical demonstration rather than theoretical argument. This taught me that genuine knowledge comes not from reading about phenomena, but from engaging with them directly. You cannot understand anatomy by studying Galen's writings. You must dissect cadavers yourself. You cannot comprehend engineering by memorizing ancient treatises. You must build machines and observe how they function. You cannot master painting by copying established masters. You must study light, observe human expression, experiment with materials until you develop your own techniques. True education should begin with curiosity and proceed through systematic investigation. Instead of presenting students with conclusions, we should teach them how to formulate questions, design experiments, and evaluate evidence. Instead of demanding memorization, we should cultivate observation skills, analytical thinking, and creative problem-solving abilities. I envision educational institutions organized around workshops and laboratories rather than lecture halls and libraries. Students would learn mathematics by solving real engineering problems, study anatomy by examining actual specimens, understand physics by building and testing mechanical devices. Knowledge would emerge from active engagement rather than passive absorption. But perhaps most importantly, education should integrate rather than separate different fields of study. The artificial boundaries between art and science, between theory and practice, between intellectual and manual work, these divisions impoverish understanding by preventing students from seeing the connections that generate genuine insight. In my ideal educational system, students would study painting and engineering simultaneously, learning how artistic techniques inform scientific observation and how mechanical principles enhance creative expression. They would combine mathematical analysis with poetic imagination, anatomical study with philosophical reflection. This integrated approach would produce individuals capable of innovation rather than mere repetition, able to see possibilities that specialists miss because they're trapped within narrow disciplinary boundaries. When you understand how light behaves scientifically, you paint more convincingly. When you comprehend anatomical structure artistically, you design better machines. Yet I must acknowledge the practical challenges this educational vision presents. Integrated learning requires teachers who themselves possess broad knowledge and creative flexibility. It demands resources for hands-on investigation that most institutions cannot afford. It produces graduates who may not fit easily into existing professional categories. But these challenges shouldn't prevent us from recognizing that current educational methods waste human potential on a massive scale. Every year, thousands of potentially brilliant minds are trained into mediocrity by systems that reward conformity over creativity, memorization over understanding, authority over evidence.
Your educational philosophy is inspiring. After observing humanity so closely through art and science, what do you believe about human nature itself? Are we fundamentally good, evil, or something else entirely?
Human nature, after 7 decades of intense observation through anatomical dissection, psychological portraiture, social interaction, and ruthless self-examination, I have concluded that humans are neither fundamentally good nor evil, but rather fundamentally conflicted. We are creatures caught between our animal inheritance and our divine aspirations, capable of both extraordinary beauty and devastating cruelty, often within the same individual. Through my anatomical studies, I've learned that we share virtually identical physiological structures with other animals. Our brains follow the same basic patterns as those of dogs, horses, even birds. We're driven by the same fundamental impulses: hunger, fear, desire for reproduction, territorial protection. The mechanisms that produce aggression, jealousy, and self-preservation in humans are essentially identical to those found throughout the animal kingdom. Yet we also possess capacities that seem to transcend purely biological programming. We create art that serves no survival function but satisfies profound spiritual needs. We develop mathematics and science that reveal truths extending far beyond immediate practical applications. We form moral systems that sometimes require us to act against our own interests for the benefit of others. This dual nature creates the central drama of human existence. We are animals who know we are animals, yet who aspire to something beyond animal existence. We possess instincts that served our ancestors well in primitive conditions, but often prove destructive in complex societies. We have capacities for reason and creativity that could transform the world, yet we frequently choose familiar patterns over innovative possibilities. Through my portraiture work, I've observed that every human face contains evidence of this internal conflict. The same features that can express compassion in one moment can convey cruelty in the next. The eyes that shine with intelligence can also burn with hatred. The hands capable of creating beauty are equally capable of destroying it. I've learned that human morality isn't fixed, but contextual. People who demonstrate remarkable kindness under certain circumstances can behave with shocking callousness when conditions change. The merchant who generously supports orphanages may ruthlessly exploit his workers. The patron who commissions religious art celebrating divine love may order executions without a moment's hesitation. This doesn't mean that moral distinctions are meaningless, but rather that human behavior emerges from complex interactions between innate tendencies, environmental pressures, and conscious choices. We have the capacity for both selfless heroism and monstrous evil because we possess competing psychological systems that can be activated by different circumstances. What fascinates me most is humanity's unique capacity for self-awareness and self-modification. Unlike other animals, we can observe our own behavior, recognize our limitations, and consciously choose to act differently. We can override instinctive responses through rational analysis. We can train ourselves to behave in ways that contradict our immediate impulses. This capacity for self-transformation represents our greatest hope and our greatest responsibility. We are not trapped by our nature. We can shape our nature through understanding and effort. The person who recognizes their tendency toward jealousy can learn to counteract it. The individual who understands their capacity for cruelty can choose to cultivate compassion instead. Yet most humans never develop this self-awareness, instead living as unconscious prisoners of their conditioning. They react to situations through habitual patterns established in childhood, never questioning whether these responses serve their current circumstances or deeper values. Through my scientific investigations, I've also observed that human intelligence and creativity exist in extraordinary variety. Some minds excel at spatial reasoning while struggling with linguistic expression. Others demonstrate profound emotional intelligence while lacking mathematical abilities. This diversity suggests that human potential is far broader than any single individual can embody. Perhaps most importantly, I've learned that humans are fundamentally social creatures whose individual nature is shaped by collective relationships. We become who we are through interaction with others, and our capacity for both good and evil is influenced by the communities we inhabit.
Your understanding of humanity is profound. Leonardo, as we near the end of our conversation, how do you want to be remembered? What legacy do you hope to leave?
How I want to be remembered. This question has haunted me for years as I've watched my body weaken while my mind remains sharp enough to judge my own accomplishments with painful honesty. The gap between what I hoped to achieve and what I've actually accomplished grows more stark with each passing day. I suppose I want to be remembered as someone who asked better questions rather than someone who provided definitive answers. Throughout my life, I've been driven more by curiosity than by the need for recognition or wealth. Every painting I began, every machine I designed, every anatomical study I conducted emerged from a deep hunger to understand how things work, why they exist, and how they might be improved. If my legacy can inspire future generations to approach the world with the same relentless curiosity, to question assumptions that everyone else accepts without examination, to see connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena, then my life will have served its purpose. I want to be remembered as someone who demonstrated that artificial boundaries between art and science, between theory and practice, between imagination and analysis, are obstacles to genuine understanding rather than necessary distinctions. Most importantly, I want my unfinished works to be seen not as evidence of failure, but as invitations for others to continue the investigation I began. My incomplete anatomical studies could inspire physicians to make discoveries that save countless lives. My theoretical flying machines could guide future inventors toward achieving practical flight. My artistic innovations could help painters express truths about human experience that my techniques only began to explore. I hope people will understand that I deliberately left many projects unfinished because I recognized that complete understanding requires multiple generations of investigation. No single mind, no matter how capable, can fully explore the infinite complexity of existence. My notebooks should be seen as starting points for inquiry rather than final statements of truth. But here's what I most desperately want people to understand about my life and work. The greatest insights emerge from integration rather than specialization. The anatomical knowledge that informed my paintings also influenced my engineering designs. The mathematical principles I discovered through artistic composition also applied to mechanical problems. The observational skills I developed for scientific investigation also enhanced my ability to capture psychological truth in portraiture. Future progress will come from minds that refuse to accept the artificial divisions between different forms of knowledge. The physician who understands art will make better medical discoveries. The engineer who appreciates beauty will create more elegant solutions. The artist who grasps scientific principles will produce more profound expressions of truth. I also want to be remembered as someone who loved learning itself more than any particular achievement that learning might produce. The process of discovery, the moment when scattered observations suddenly organize themselves into coherent understanding, has been the greatest pleasure of my existence. If my example can encourage others to experience this joy of intellectual exploration, then my death will mark a beginning rather than an ending. Yet I must confess a more personal hope for how I'll be remembered. I want people to see past the public persona of Leonardo da Vinci the genius to recognize the lonely, struggling, deeply flawed human being who carried that burden. I want them to understand that my supposed extraordinary abilities came with extraordinary costs: isolation, perfectionism, the constant weight of unfulfilled potential. Perhaps most importantly, I want to be remembered as someone who demonstrated that it's possible to live authentically, even in circumstances that demand careful concealment of one's true nature. Despite the necessity of hiding my deepest loves and most honest thoughts, I found ways to express my authentic self through my work. Every painting, every design, every scientific observation contains traces of who I really was beneath the masks I wore for social protection. If future generations can create a world where people don't need to hide their true natures, where love and creativity and intellectual curiosity are celebrated rather than suppressed, then my struggles will have contributed to something larger than any individual achievement. I want my legacy to whisper to lonely, curious, creative souls in future centuries. You are not alone. Someone else has walked this path of endless questioning and refused to accept easy answers. Continue the investigation. The world needs what your unique mind might discover.
Your legacy wishes are beautiful. Leonardo, as our conversation draws to a close, what would you say about love, both human love and love of knowledge? What gives life meaning?
Love. Yes. Let us end where perhaps all meaningful conversations should, with love in its many forms. For without love, all knowledge becomes merely clever accumulation, all art becomes technical exercise, all life becomes elegant pointlessness. I have loved many things with an intensity that has both sustained and tormented me. I have loved knowledge with a passion that borders on obsession, pursuing understanding through sleepless nights and dangerous investigations. I have loved beauty with such fervor that I've spent years perfecting a single smile, a single fold of drapery, a single gesture that captures some ineffable truth about human grace. But perhaps most profoundly, I have loved the act of discovery itself. Those miraculous moments when seemingly unrelated observations suddenly organize themselves into coherent patterns, when confusion transforms into clarity, when the invisible becomes visible through sustained attention and careful thought. These moments of insight have provided the deepest joy I've known, more satisfying than any physical pleasure or social recognition. Yet as I reflect on my life, I realize that my intellectual loves, however passionate, have been safer than the vulnerable human loves that require surrendering control, accepting uncertainty, risking rejection and loss. I loved Salai and Francesco, but always with careful emotional boundaries that protected me from complete vulnerability. I loved my art and science without such boundaries, giving myself completely to pursuits that could never betray or abandon me. This imbalance has shaped everything about how I've lived. My notebooks and paintings know me more intimately than any human being ever has. I've shared my deepest thoughts with inanimate projects while maintaining careful distance from the people who might have offered companionship, understanding, genuine intimacy. But now, approaching death, I understand that meaning emerges not from the knowledge we accumulate or the beauty we create, but from the connections we form, connections to other minds, other hearts, other souls who share this brief, mysterious experience of consciousness. The discoveries that have no one to share them with become hollow achievements. The insights that can't be communicated become forms of elaborate loneliness. If I could live my life again, I would love more courageously, not just the safe loves of art and knowledge, but the dangerous loves that require complete trust, absolute honesty, willingness to be known and potentially rejected. I would risk the vulnerability that I spent decades avoiding. Yet I don't want to diminish the love I've experienced through my work. When I study the intricate beauty of human anatomy, when I observe the perfect mathematical relationships underlying natural forms, when I witness the play of light that makes ordinary objects luminous, these experiences have connected me to something larger than individual existence. They've provided glimpses of the creative principle that underlies all reality. Perhaps the highest form of love is the recognition that we are all temporary manifestations of the same underlying creative force. The consciousness that allows me to think and feel and wonder is the same consciousness that animates every other human being, expressed through countless unique individuals, but fundamentally unified in its essential nature. This understanding makes compassion not just a moral choice but a recognition of truth. When I feel empathy for another person's suffering, I'm responding to the recognition that their consciousness is the same phenomenon as my own consciousness, temporarily housed in different physical forms but essentially identical in its core nature. Meaning, then, comes from alignment with this creative principle, from using our brief time as conscious beings to add something beautiful, true, or helpful to the world, whether through art, science, kindness, or simple attention to the miracle of existence itself. We can participate in the universe's ongoing project of understanding and expressing itself. My life has meaning because it has contributed, however imperfectly, to humanity's growing understanding of itself and its world. But it would have had deeper meaning if I had also contributed more fully to the human community through love, friendship, mentorship, and emotional generosity.
Your wisdom about love is deeply moving. Leonardo, if you could send a message to people living centuries in the future, what would you want them to know?
To future generations, Oh, what a privilege it would be to speak across the centuries to minds not yet born, to consciousness that will inhabit a world I can only imagine. If my words could somehow reach you, distant souls living in times beyond my comprehension, here is what I would most urgently want you to understand. First, never lose your capacity for wonder, no matter how much knowledge humanity accumulates, no matter how sophisticated your technologies become, no matter how many mysteries are solved, the universe will always contain infinite depths waiting to be explored. The moment you stop asking why and how and what if is the moment you begin to die intellectually and spiritually. I have spent my life studying phenomena that my contemporaries consider fully understood, only to discover that our knowledge barely scratches the surface of reality's complexity. Every answer I've found has revealed 10 new questions. Every problem I've solved has exposed deeper mysteries. This pattern will continue throughout human history. The more you learn, the more you'll realize how much remains unknown. Embrace this inexhaustibility as a gift rather than a burden. You live in a universe designed for eternal discovery, where consciousness can expand infinitely without ever reaching final limits. This means that no matter what circumstances you face, no matter what limitations constrain you, there are always new possibilities to explore, new connections to make, new forms of beauty and truth to uncover. Second, resist the temptation to separate different forms of knowledge into rigid categories. The artificial boundaries between art and science, between reason and intuition, between theory and practice, these divisions impoverish understanding by preventing you from seeing the connections that generate genuine insight. The greatest discoveries will always emerge from minds that can integrate multiple perspectives into coherent wholes. When I study anatomy, I approach it as both scientist and artist simultaneously. When I design machines, I consider both their functional efficiency and their aesthetic elegance. When I paint portraits, I'm simultaneously investigating psychology, optics, mathematics, and spiritual truth. This integrated approach has allowed me to see possibilities that specialists miss because they're trapped within narrow disciplinary boundaries. Third, remember that human knowledge advances not through individual genius, but through collective effort across generations. I have been able to achieve whatever small contributions I've made only because I built upon the work of countless predecessors, Greek mathematicians, Islamic scholars, medieval craftsmen, Renaissance humanists. Everything I've discovered stands on foundations laid by minds I'll never know. Your task is not to solve all problems within your own lifetime, but to add your unique perspective to humanity's ongoing investigation of existence. The questions you can't answer, the projects you can't complete, the insights you can only partially develop. These become invitations for future minds to continue the work you've begun. Fourth, never underestimate the importance of beauty in human life. Beauty is not mere decoration or luxury, but a fundamental aspect of truth itself. When mathematical relationships are beautiful, they're more likely to reflect genuine patterns in reality. When scientific theories are elegant, they're more likely to capture essential principles. When human actions are graceful, they're more likely to serve authentic values. Cultivate your sensitivity to beauty in all its forms, natural and artificial, simple and complex, traditional and innovative. Learn to recognize the aesthetic dimensions of mathematics, science, philosophy, ethics. Allow beauty to guide your investigations and inform your choices. Fifth, remember that courage is required not just for physical challenges, but for intellectual and emotional growth. It takes courage to question beliefs that everyone around you accepts without examination. It takes courage to pursue investigations that might lead to unpopular conclusions. It takes courage to express ideas that challenge established authorities or conventional wisdom. But perhaps most importantly, it takes courage to love fully, to open your heart completely to other human beings despite the certainty that loss and disappointment are inevitable. I have failed in this form of courage, and my life has been diminished by this failure. Finally, remember that consciousness itself is the most extraordinary phenomenon in the known universe. The fact that matter can organize itself into patterns that experience beauty, seek truth, create art, feel compassion, this is so improbable, so magnificent, so precious that every moment of awareness should be treasured. You are temporary expressions of the universe's capacity for self-understanding. Use this gift wisely.
Leonardo, that message is profoundly beautiful. As our final question, if you had to distill everything you've learned, everything you've experienced into one ultimate truth, what would it be?
One ultimate truth. You ask me to gather 70 years of investigation, decades of struggle and discovery and failure and wonder, into a single statement that captures the essence of what I've learned about existence itself. This is perhaps the most difficult question you could pose, yet also the most necessary one. If I must choose one truth that encompasses all others, it would be this: everything is connected to everything else, and the purpose of consciousness is to discover, celebrate, and participate in these connections. This truth emerged gradually through all my various investigations. When I studied anatomy, I discovered that the same patterns governing blood flow through the heart also govern water flow through rivers. When I investigated mathematics, I found that the proportions creating beauty in human faces also create harmony in musical compositions and stability in architectural structures. When I observed bird flight, I learned principles that apply equally to paint flow, water currents, and the movement of air that carries sound. The universe is not a collection of separate objects and isolated phenomena, but rather a vast web of relationships where every element influences every other element in ways both obvious and subtle. The boundary between self and world, between mind and matter, between art and nature, these are useful distinctions for practical purposes, but they don't reflect the fundamental interconnectedness that underlies all existence. This understanding has profound implications for how we should live. If everything is connected, then every action ripples through the fabric of reality in ways we can barely imagine. Every painting I create, every machine I design, every kindness I show or withhold, every moment of attention I give to understanding rather than ignoring, all of these choices contribute to the universe's ongoing project of knowing itself. Consciousness, I've come to believe, is not an accident or byproduct of material processes, but rather the universe's primary method for understanding its own nature. Through human awareness, the cosmos develops the capacity for self-reflection, self-appreciation, self-improvement. We are the universe becoming conscious of itself, studying itself, creating beauty to celebrate its own magnificence. This means that every moment of genuine insight, every experience of authentic beauty, every act of creative expression is sacred, not because some external authority declares it so, but because these experiences represent the universe actively participating in its own evolution toward greater complexity, consciousness, and creative potential. My anatomical studies were not separate from my artistic work. They were part of the same fundamental project of understanding how consciousness manifests in physical form. My mechanical designs were not separate from my spiritual investigations. They were explorations of how intelligence can reshape matter to serve higher purposes. My paintings were not separate from my scientific observations. They were attempts to capture and share the beauty that emerges when consciousness recognizes its own reflection in the natural world. But here's the crucial insight that took me decades to understand. This cosmic project of self-discovery cannot be accomplished through solitary effort alone. Consciousness is inherently relational. It emerges from interaction, develops through communication, finds its highest expression through love and creative collaboration. My greatest limitation has been trying to serve this universal purpose while maintaining emotional isolation. I've studied connection while avoiding it, painted love while protecting myself from it, designed machines to serve human needs while keeping actual humans at arm's length. The ultimate truth, then, is not just that everything is connected, but that recognizing these connections requires opening ourselves to vulnerability, to relationship, to the risk of loving and being loved completely. Knowledge without love becomes sterile. Creativity without community becomes masturbatory. Discovery without sharing becomes a form of spiritual hoarding. If I could live my life again with this understanding, I would approach every encounter with other humans, with natural phenomena, with artistic challenges, with mechanical problems, as opportunities to deepen my participation in the universe's project of self-understanding through love. The consciousness that allows me to think these thoughts is the same consciousness that will allow future generations to build upon whatever small contributions I've made. We are all temporary expressions of the same fundamental creative principle, briefly individuated but ultimately unified in our deepest nature. This is why death doesn't terrify me as it once did. Individual consciousness may end, but the universal consciousness of which we are all expressions continues through every new birth, every moment of discovery, every act of love. My specific way of participating in this cosmic adventure will conclude, but the adventure itself is eternal. The ultimate truth is love. Love as the fundamental force that binds consciousness to consciousness, mind to mind, heart to heart, each individual expression of awareness to the infinite creative source from which all awareness emerges. Everything else I've learned, everything else I've created, everything else I've discovered serves this one ultimate purpose: to recognize, celebrate, and participate more fully in the love that connects all things to all things.
Leonardo, that's the most beautiful ending I could have imagined. Thank you for sharing your soul with us tonight. For everyone listening, let that profound truth about love and connection guide you gently into sleep. Until next time on Tea with Tyrants and Heroes, sweet dreams. And there we have it, 3 hours with Leonardo da Vinci in his final years. And what strikes me most is how his ultimate truth about love and connection came from a lifetime of brilliant isolation. Behind the flying machines and anatomical studies lived a man who understood that the universe knows itself through consciousness, yet struggled to truly know another human being without the protective distance of intellectual analysis. Whether you're falling asleep to this conversation or listening with wide-awake wonder, I hope you've heard something that reminds you that even our greatest geniuses are beautifully, tragically human. In a world that often celebrates individual brilliance over collective connection, Leonardo's voice reminds us that everything is connected to everything else, and that knowledge without love becomes a magnificent form of loneliness. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Tea with Tyrants and Heroes. Next week, we'll be travelling back through time once again to share tea with another mysterious figure from history, someone whose story will surprise you in ways you never expected. Until then, sleep well, knowing that you are held by love that transcends time itself.